Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host, and we are in February. In fact, today is February 2nd. It's Groundhog's Day. I have no idea what Puxatawny Phil decided, but I can tell you in Colorado, it's snowing hard here. And, we are in a new month, and we are talking this month about the topic of dual use technologies. And what better company to speak with that about than our month sponsor, Northrop Grumman. We have with us here today, Colonel United States Army retired, Robert Menti. He is a leader in Northrop's Armaments Systems Division. And we are going to talk with Rob again. For those that have been following this podcast, you may have recall that Rob was on this podcast back in November during Innovation Month. Sponsored by Iris Automation. He shared the stage and the spotlight at that time with Brigadier General retired United States Air Force, Andy Armacost. He was the former dean at the Air Force Academy and is now the current president at the University of North Dakota. We had such a great time live in North Dakota from the UAS Summit and Expo, and that's where I really connected with Rob. So Rob, so great to have you back.
Thank you, Dawn, and as always, an honor and pleasure to speak with you and your community.
Well, look, a lot has happened since November in the world, and I want to really start there. And before I do, I do want to remind everybody this is a live stream, so please jump in with your questions, tell us where you're from, give us positive encouragement. We love all of that. But let's talk about what's happening in the world, because we're gonna focus on your counter UAS and some related technologies here today, Rob. And when you think about just even the last several weeks, things are heating up across the globe. We've seen some buildup at the Ukrainian-Russian border, which is a little bit frightening. We've seen recreational drones getting shut down in the United Arab Emirates because of a Houthi attack, an Iranian-backed Houthi attack using commercial off-the-shelf small UAS. And those are just two significant things in the past several weeks, just off the top. So let's start, Rob, with what you're seeing, and maybe go back a little bit. We covered some of this in Clubhouse, but this is not this idea of small UAS threat is really nothing new. And so if you can kind of walk us through that a little bit, why we're even talking about this topic.
Well, thanks, Don, and you're summarized everything quite well. But what we're really seeing, and it's been going on for, as you said, for quite a long time, and especially really since 2014 during the first Russian incursion into eastern Ukraine, and then continuing on, especially with Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, and then obviously incursions are happening in the Middle East almost every day now. And what we're saying is it is unmanned systems in many different domains and at many different sizes, and both state actors and non-state actors have access to this technology because it is very widely available commercial technology, hence the dual use technology theme today, that can be rapidly modified and used by whoever really wants to use them as in a way of what we call an asymmetric capability that very cheaply and at very low risk can cause state actors like ourselves and our coalition partners to have to expend time, resources, political capital on defending against these very hard to detect and very hard to defeat threats.
And yeah, Rob, I was going to say, you mentioned 2014. It was around 2015 that I curated some content for the International Conference on UAS, and I did a counter UAS panel. That's primarily an academic conference, for engineers. But I had Major General retired Fred Rogero, former Air Force Chief of Safety on that panel talking about counter UAS. And he used a phrase that now I hear very widely used, not attributed to him, but it was the first time I ever heard it. This idea of the democratization of aviation. And, you hear this because what used to be really reserved, as you say, Rob, to nation states to have air forces is now something so easily attainable by not only state actors, right, that maybe don't have the kind of capital that that the United States and its coalition partners have, but non-state actors, and we're talking about terrorists, we're talking about criminal networks, and things of that nature. So very significant development there. And you mentioned the war basically that recently occurred with the Armenians and Azerbaijanis, where drones and unmanned systems played such a significant role. We covered that in Clubhouse. And by the way, everybody, again, if you're not on Clubhouse, if you're not jumping into our Drone Law Connections room, I highly recommend you do that. And those audio discussions are available for playback as well. But let's kind of give a real quick synopsis of what that war was, why it's so significant, and what you believe it will it kind of forecasts for the future, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you, Don, for that segue, because it's quite important to look at that and then segue into something that was in the press today about what Russia has done with some export of their technology. So the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in 2020 is really a key case study in how what we refer to as the hybrid war type of operation will become the new normal, and we fully expect that many of the techniques that were used there will be, God forbid it hopefully doesn't happen, but if Russia does push farther west in Ukraine, that we'll see many of these same things. This is a heavy reliance on an integrated capability of asymmetric capabilities in the cyber domain, as well as in the unmanned platform domain, as well as heavy use of electronic warfare for jamming and comms interdiction, as well as, interestingly enough, I know it's a little bit off topic here, but also a very closely intertwined use of social media and other types of influence capabilities to leverage how people are using these integrated things in a way that you don't need tanks and artillery and aircraft the way that we've seen over the last 100 years or so. So in Nagorno-Karabakh, the Azerbaijanis were able to use technology, a lot of it from state players, Turkey, Israel, and others that they had accumulated, but they used it in a very, very innovative and smart way to get very rapid targeting of the Armenian forces, and then also to use loitering munitions as a way of kamikaze attack and other weaponization, so that the ability for the Armenians to react and maneuver was almost nullified.
Wow.
It also set conditions for the eventual takeover by a very, very small amount of conventional and special operations forces in a key town that holds the key pass there in this area that has been the territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan for several decades. So really, really powerful. And what's concerning is when one looks at that, many of the Western forces that have not had to face this type of threat, I can say for at least for the U.S., we did not face this type of complex threat in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 20 plus years. So we do not have resident capabilities to deal with that at this time. I mean, a lot of things are happening quickly to nullify that. But as I said, when you look at the ability of these types of weapons to rapidly strike and then isolate maneuver forces, it really does present a very, very significant challenge for anyone, really.
Yeah.
The
Well,
same types of
Rob, I mean, what you're talking about is multi-domain operations,
Yep.
kind of networked across the unmanned and autonomous world. I will go out on a limb and say I feel like, we've seen the small drone threat for a long time, including in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also I would say the integration of social media to leverage public opinion, win hearts and minds, and things of that mislead, quite frankly. The enemy was really good at dragging bodies out, that they had on standby, if you will, and saying, "Oh, look at the horrible drone strike. The Americans just killed all of these people." So I think that's been going on for a while. But so we know that drones have been used for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance (ISR). They've been used for targeted assassinations, real and attempted, actual successful and attempted, to destroy critical infrastructure, like what we just saw, not only in the UAE, but I think just a little bit before that in Saudi Arabia at the airport there. So this is something that has been that, at least that aspect of it has been going on. So if I recall correctly, Rob, you were talking about the inspiration for your team because, when people look at the division you're in, the armament system division, they're probably thinking, well, hold on a minute, why is counter UAS residing with them? And I think you shared before that you all have this Bushmaster, product line of munitions. And as you were looking at these various threats, your team started thinking, how do we detect? How do we track? How do we identify before then we can mitigate these threats on the battlefield? So can you walk us a little bit through kind of that process and that inspiration for your team?
Sure. Probably about 5 years ago now, we were doing an assessment. Our part of Northrop Grumman here in Minneapolis in armament systems in our portfolio of capabilities are the Bushmaster family of medium caliber cannons. These cannons are found on multiple platforms in the U.S. inventory, like AH-64 Apache helicopters, M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, the Stryker fighting vehicle, as well as on several Air Force and Navy platforms. And additionally, we've got cannons in about 66 countries around the world. So they are a very prolific, very reliable chain gun type design that has been around for several decades, but is extremely reliable and is a very accurate weapon system. We also make much of the medium caliber and large caliber ammunition for the Department of Defense as well as for our global customers. And we had invested very heavily in what we refer to as advanced ammunition, which is really proximity fused ammunition and airburst ammunition, and also guided ammunition, which is moving along very well and will be available here in the very near future, working with our partners in the Department of Defense. But really, in the near term, the proximity fused ammunition was really the game changer for us because proximity fused ammo has been around for a very long time, since World War II, but not in a bullet that is 30 millimeters in diameter by about 113 millimeters long. So very, very small round, very, very high G load when firing. So getting all those electronics to survive gun launch at those things was quite a feat. So we leveraged the mating our advanced ammunition, proximity fused ammo, with the Bushmaster cannon system to be able to go after these unmanned systems in multiple domains, primarily in the air domain, against small Class 1 and Class 2 UASs that are within the maximum effective range of the cannon system for engagement. However, as we talked about drones being used for ISR, trying to detect, track, and identify these things is extremely hard to do, because if you've ever been out at your kid's soccer game or seen drones out in the civilian world, once they get 200, 300 yards away, you can't hear them and you can't see them.
Yeah,
So
very difficult. We're going to walk through all this, by the
I'm
way,
sorry.
Rob, and everybody out there. There's a couple things I want to do. Number one, I do want to just remind everybody that we're going to get to the commercial application of this. We're talking about the initial inspiration for this technology at Northrop and obviously being on the battlefield, but how then it will translate to the commercial and civilian
Sure,
sector, including domestically. The other thing I
sure.
want to do super quick, Rob, there people are blowing up the chat, and I just want to like do a real quick, rundown of some shout outs here. We've got Don Pearson, who I knew from my days in the Pentagon, with the National Guard and was the RPA manager and working for General Atomics, coming at us live from Ali Al Salem in Kuwait. So we've got someone in Kuwait dialed in.
Really?
We've got someone in Cape Town, South Africa, Marshall Nelson, giving us a shout out. Marshall seems to be with the youth media movement. So great to have you from South Africa. And then we've got someone from the UK, or mentioning the UK here. Before you go, as a regular and talking about son that's in the Air Force in Lincolnshire, England for the past 10 years, and how they're using, drones as part of the Air Force platform there. So anyway, great stuff, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us and for chiming in. Keep it coming, especially if you have questions. I've got another one here. About cyber and privacy and infrastructure. We'll get to that one later. Justin Daniels, give us one. What I want to do is talk about Rob's system first, and the fact that you created it to marry up, to track,
Mhm.
to identify, detect, identify, track these drone threats.
Yep.
And how does it do that? Because you think about, everybody talks about artificial intelligence, machine learning. Obviously drones and counter UAS systems are cyber and networked systems. How does and first of all, I'm remiss. We never said the name of this system. It's
Thanks.
MACE. It's an acronym. Can you tell us what that stands for?
Sure, but I just would like to say first, to hear Ali Al Salim again, this is such a small community that we have. A place I know very well, been there many times, going back to 1998 during Operation Desert Thunder. So thank you for being there in the kingdom in Kuwait. So it's a small world. A lot better living
Absolutely.
conditions there than it was back in 98. But anyway, our MACE system is referred to as the Mobile Acquisition and Queuing Effector. We really designed it as a demonstrator of capability to do kind of what we call the front end of the engagement sequence: detection, tracking, and identification. And even though we are Northrop Grumman, we centered it on a operating system that is a Northrop Grumman owned operating system, but our components that are on this particular configuration were selected for a couple of reasons. One, to be at a price point that is a value driven price point, that kind of matches where the Canon system ranges are, with a little bit longer sensor detection, but also really centered on the availability of a three-dimensional radar that is usable in the ground, air, and littoral domains simultaneously at a realistic, well, I shouldn't say realistic, a reasonable price point compared to the high-end military grade radars. And we also designed it to make sure that we could use it with a lot of different customers. Back to your dual technology, we designed MACE as an open architecture modular system that can easily interchange components based on a very smart operating system that is enabled with autonomy and machine learning, but can be customized to meet specific customer needs. And then also we made sure that we could export it to our global customers, and then also use it here in the homeland with our federal and state law enforcement organizations, which we're heavily involved with, because they're very interested in COTS technology that is dual use, and obviously don't have really a need for a cannon right now, but more on the detection, tracking, and identification, and electronic warfare and passive RF detection capability that we have resident on MACE is very interesting to the law enforcement organizations. And I'm sure when we get into the dual use technology discussion, you'll go into your specialty of the challenges of countering unmanned systems here in the homeland.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said an acronym, and probably many people out there know what it is, but just to be clear, COTS or COTS is commercial off the shelf. So, Northrop designed this to be able to plug and play with COTS technologies purposefully, not only for ease on the battlefield, because frankly, the DoD purchases a lot of COTS type technologies, but also on the commercial side as well, getting back to that dual use theme. But let's talk about how the MACE system first is able to detect
Sure.
A drone threat, and how it can like distinguish, if you will, between whether it's a bird or, as you said, I think during Clubhouse, a drone or Batman in the
Right.
sky
Never know.
that someone needs to be concerned about.
That's right. That's right. You can Spider-Man maybe bouncing around too in the city. You never
Yeah,
know.
maybe.
So we use a multimodal sensor capability, and we can add in more if a customer desires. Again, our MACE demonstrator platform was completely funded internally by Northrop Grumman as a proof of concept and proof of principle, not as a end all be all qualified system that is fully capable to do the full span of operations that you need. However, on the system as it is today, we use two primary means of detection, and that is our 3D radar that is provided by SRC. We use a Griffin three-dimensional radar, and we also have a passive radio frequency detection capability that is running all the time as well. So we have an active and a passive way of acquiring these targets, and it can function, as I said, simultaneously air, ground, and in a littoral. And when I define littoral, currently the technology is set so if the MACE platform is sitting on the ground at a beach or at a port, it can look out over the water and be able to discern targets, which is a pretty complex capabilities, as we all know, with radars. Clutter, background, and environmental conditions can play havoc with radars. So a lot of hard work and development to get to this capability, because what you really want to get to for this particular application is a multi-mission capability that can do a lot of different things for you on the same platform that is easy to understand. It's controlled with an Xbox controller. I cannot drive it, but my young 30-year-old engineers pick it up like in 20 minutes and they're good to go. And so the way the engagement, I should say the detection sequence goes, at longer range, if we have the radar turned on and we're radiating, the radar is the first thing that detects the target. And again, it can be on the ground or in the air or out on the water. And then automatically, the camera that is on the system, and we have an electro-optical and infrared camera, as well as a laser rangefinder, laser pointer, and laser designator, all built into our camera system. The camera is automatically slewed to where the radar is looking. And then this is where the autonomy and machine learning kicks in. We have a machine learning capability that is called Dragonfly, not spelled differently than the company that you've had on previously.
Yeah.
It is a Northrop Grumman owned dual neural network based machine learning capability that helps us detect and define if it is a drone or if it is a bird or a log or a tree or some other thing. And we can run that capability in all the domains simultaneously. It is a bit nascent right now because, again, this was all IRAD funded. And as we all know, with machine learning and AI, it's more than the algorithm. It's really about the data set that the algorithm has exposure to so that it can continue to learn and get smarter. So obviously, every time we're in the field and route testing, it's getting smarter, but it will continue to evolve over time.
Yeah, I know just enough about AI to be dangerous, thanks to, as you alluded to, Rob, the company Dragonfly and Cameron Shell, CEO, who they sponsored last month's podcast, Tech Showcase Month, and doing great things, as you know, Rob, because you saw that tech demonstrated with biometrics on the stage live at Edge 2022. By the way, that was an amazing event. Rob was on our roundtable panel with Cam Shell and a bunch of other amazing folks, including Don Bershoff, True Weather. We had TSA, we had Hui Tran from NASA. Just great stuff. But this, and of course, well, gosh, within the last couple of weeks, we had Key AI, QII.ai, Michael Cohen, CEO, on here talking about how their smart AI ML technology is helping in drone inspections. And so you see AI ML, just kind of proliferating across drone technology. And in this case, counter drone, the more information and data you feed it, the smarter the system becomes and the better it gets at identifying these threats. So it IDs the threat, it cues on it, as you said. And, because we're talking dual use, and we're going to get to those domestic threats here in a second, Rob, but because it cues, there's obviously always a human in the loop. Is that right?
Yes. So currently, the way that the demonstration system is designed is a man in the loop, but we are fully capable.
Or woman, just saying,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I have
Yes.
to
Sorry
say
about that.
that.
Sorry about that. Sorry. That is probably not the right way to go.
That's
Operator
okay.
in the loop. Okay. Operator in the loop. Thank you for that. Operator in the loop or operator on the loop, whereas it is happening autonomously with a human being there to intervene if something goes awry. And we have also, we haven't done anything with it, but the engineers have thought through how we would go completely to person out of the loop. But obviously, there's in your specialty, there's a whole bunch of issues that come with that. So where we're kind of seeing it right now is most of the customers still would like to have an operator in the loop before a engagement decision is made, either non-lethally with the jammer or lethally with a cannon, laser, HPM, or effector, and some other effector that you're going to do. But I would like to mention, to your point, as AI, ML, and autonomy continue to proliferate, the unmanned systems in all domains are getting smarter and smarter and smarter and are less reliant on remote control by an operator. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is it takes a lot of bandwidth. Two, your range is restricted. Three, you can defeat those. And four, from the commercial side, that's money. If you can automate something, you can save cost if you don't have a human being that costs a lot of money involved in that operation. And so as we see the unmanned threats moving to be more autonomous, that leads one to having to go a little bit farther to the right on the effector scale beyond traditional EW jamming. Because if a system is autonomous, navigate on GPS or navigating on automatic terrain recognition or other forms of nav and is not getting piloted by someone, you have to have a kinetic effector, a cannon, a missile, an HPM, or a laser to take that threat out of the equation. So, and I want to be really clear here, is especially with our capability, even though it is a cannon system, this is not your grandfather's World War II spraying 1,000 bullets in the sky. This is a very precise application of 1 to 2 or maybe 3 rounds at ranges about 1,000 meters to 2,000 meters that are applied very precisely and with a very low collateral damage capability.
Yeah, and so we do have a question from out there, because when we think about drones and some of the limiting factors, even on drone, with regards to drone operations, weather is a big consideration. Yep. We have a LinkedIn user saying, "Is this an all-weather system?"
Yes. So, excellent question. And as we know, the environment can be extremely challenging for both radar and optical systems, especially think. A schmal in the Middle East, a dust storm where you cannot see a foot in front of your face and it's 120 degrees. That makes it quite hard to do things. But that's why we have multi-modes of sensors to be able to work through those various environmental conditions. We are all weather. However, the environment weather does degrade performance. As we all know, kind of here, if you understand radars here, is a radar in the open desert operates much, much better than it does in the middle of, the Sequoia National Forest with trees all around it. So there is the pluses and minuses that you have to work through your concept of operations and the way that you employ the system. And then also, like I said, having multiple sensors to help you be able to operate in the widest environmental conditions that you can.
Hey, Rob, I want to talk about these various effectors, but before we do, I also want to just kind of foot stomp this idea that your system is agnostic to the effectors.
Mhm.
And number two, you can, like for example, domestically, you can employ the system without employing effectors. In other
Absolutely.
words, it can be used solely to,
Mhm.
to
Absolutely.
detect, identify, and track the
Absolutely.
threat. And then you can send a person, as an example, out to then deal with the operator, like in a domestic or U.S. context. So is that
Absolutely.
accurate?
Yes, absolutely. So when we laid out our concept for the system, using detect, track, ID, and engage. Obviously, on the law enforcement side, there's different requirements to do that here in the homeland than it would be on the military battlefield. But in theory and in concept, they're very, very similar. That's just the way that you deal with the threat. For instance, Border Patrol asked us, and we helped doing this with some of our predictive technology. Is okay. They wanted assistance in being able to have the Border Patrol agents on a network attack in this case, and tied into the sensor system so that they can vector the law enforcement patrols to where their individual or item of interest is without having to talk them on over a radio, which if anyone's ever done that out in the real world, is extremely difficult to do, especially in the dark when you're by yourself in a high stress environment. So we have many different techniques to be able to share that information. And to your point, most of our customers are 90% interested in that detect, track, and ID. And the effector stuff is great. They want to have that and they want to know about it. But really, it's how can you share that information, right? It's all about the Internet of Things and how the battlefield Internet of Things and the law enforcement Internet of Things is growing so that you can share the information that you have through uh, ISR or targeting or any of those means, and then be able to do something about it or inform the decision maker early enough to have time to react to do something. And
Well,
just if I could
yeah, I
share
was just
one
going to
quick
say,
thing.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so just a fascinating thing for those that have never been down on the border in the southern United States, and I had not been down there until the last couple of years with the Border Patrol, and actually watching how they do business and see the incredible efforts that our U.S. Border Patrol and ICE and DHS and OSO and everybody does down there. It's just an incredible thing to watch, and God bless them, and thank God we have them every day out there because it's a very, very tough mission. Is the folks that are trying to ingress either with people cargo or with narcotics or other contraband are extremely well financed, extremely smart, very well trained, and extremely fast. They can be over the wall in seconds, and they know exactly where to go and exactly how to hide, and they have a full group of people here on our side of the border that do those things. So the speed of reaction that the law enforcement officials have has got to be very, very quick. And then we also learned, and sorry to go on this, but it's just fascinating. On the northern border, it is a whole different ball game coming from Canada because we have miles and miles and miles and miles of nothing there. There's no fence, there's no nothing, there's no people. You can just walk across, right? But they use a lot of waterways and groundways, and the way that they use these submersible, that reminds me of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, if you're old enough to remember that, of these submersible things that just sit a few inches above the water, and they go so fast from Canada over to our side that they've got literally like 15 seconds to be able to see it, detect it, track it, and then follow it. Because as soon as it lands, somebody's over there picking it up, and they get the contraband off, and it goes into an ATV or some other thing, and poof, it's gone. So,
Yeah.
speed of detection is a really, really important thing here.
Well, it absolutely isn't, like you just talk north and south, but talk east and west, we're surrounded by water. So these littoral threats are no joke. I mean, that's why we have a Coast Guard, but our Coast Guard is small. They're small but mighty. And when you think about that, I mean, this is stuff that I teach in my Homeland Security class, Rob. So this is, you're playing my tune here, right up my alley. But I want to get back to weather just for a second because we did have a question. It's a legit question. When you talk about all weather and all these different environmental conditions, what about sub-freezing environments? This is
So,
Tim Rathman, a geologist, entrepreneur, and consultant.
sure. So again, our system as it is today is, as a internally funded capability, as a proof of concept and a demonstrator, by no means a qualified system in all environmental conditions, because obviously that's, as we understand, that's significant dollars for engineering and testing and other things that has to go into hardening the system to be able to handle that. As it is today, yes, with our aggressive series of demonstrations over the last couple of years with the demonstrator, we actually were in sub-freezing up in Montana. I'm sorry, in North Dakota, with the Department of Homeland Security doing a test. So we lived that dream. We did okay, but we learned a lot of things and we put some fixes in there. But a lot of it is okay. We learned this problem, and so when we have a customer ready to finish the development, we will do A, B, C, and D for testing, hardening, and component characterization to be able to handle those temperatures. And on the flip side, interestingly, within about 5 months of that event, we were in Saudi Arabia with a coalition customer demonstration, and we were operating in 125-degree heat with ambient solar load on the system that was off the charts. We had some challenges there, to say the least, but we learned from that one as well. And so we felt well informed that we can handle those extremes in characterization, but obviously we need someone to work with to finish that development.
Well,
All very, very difficult things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we've transitioned to the homeland, which is good because we are actually getting short on our time, which is insane. Time goes so fast when I speak with you, Rob, about this. We could talk all day long. Mentioned this kind of semi-submersible threat. We've got folks, obviously, carrying drugs across the border. They're using drones for this. They're dropping drones as contraband into prisons. Obviously drone threat potentially to critical infrastructure. We've seen it, as I mentioned, in Saudi Arabia. Not too hard to imagine in the homeland. In fact, my big CNN debut was about the issue in Pennsylvania where they found a drone, strung up with copper wires, looked like it was trying to monkey with that's a technical term, monkey with an electrical substation there, maybe take out the power grid in that local area. The list goes on, the list of horribles could go on. I don't know that we need to go there. I think there's a lot of people that have talked about it, written about it. The reality is we need to detect, we need to identify, we need to track, and then obviously we need to mitigate. And I think in the homeland, as opposed to on the battlefield, this is definitely the bigger challenge. You mentioned, Rob, that you're currently working primarily with federal clients, law enforcement. Just to be clear out there are only a very small handful of federal agencies that actually have the authority to mitigate drone threats in the homeland, and there are legal constraints on this. And I think this is something, Rob, you and I have talked about this a lot. It's something that needs to change, and I know there's concern even within the law enforcement community. I've heard actually folks in that community say, "Oh, we don't want every kind of Tom, Dick, and Harry on the street to have the authority to kind of take out a drone." And I know the drone service provider community has great concerns about that as well. I don't disagree with that, but having worked in the Air Force on DoD's drone policy for domestic use, the one General Mattis at the time, SecDef Mattis, signed out in 2018, and the one before that, there's a way to do this, right, with the right level approval authorities. In other words, if you elevate approval authorities before you can take that thing out, but in a way that it's still network timely, you're not missing out opportunities and large crowds of people are getting taken out because so-and-so didn't answer their phone. I think there's just a way to do this. And I know that's one of the biggest limiting factors you all have, especially in the critical infrastructure arena.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if you wanted to kind of comment on that or kind of where you guys are, because this is dual use technologies month. And
Sure.
Your MACE system is one of those systems I think would be super effective in the homeland, not just on the border, but for critical infrastructure, for local law enforcement. So I don't know if you want to just comment on that in the last couple of minutes that we have
Sure.
here.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And and Northrop Grumman doesn't just provide this one capability. We have obviously the size of a very large aerospace and defense capability that has incredible technologies that handle everything that we just talked about today. Um, but in this particular instance, we see that we can help augment existing security infrastructures, as you said, for critical infrastructure as well as major sporting events, major events where there's a lot of people, or anywhere where you need a temporary fence, if you will,
Airports,
or airports
right?
too.
Because TSA was on our panel at Austin Gould.
Yep,
Um,
that's a whole that you could do a whole podcast on the complexity of doing this thing at a commercial airport, which
yes.
makes things even exponentially more complicated. But to your expertise area in terms of authorities and regulation, there has to be some rapid way of delegating authorities to the appropriate level for either law enforcement or whoever is in charge of security at that site, event, or activity, to be able to handle threats fast enough so that they are protecting those that they have the mission to protect.
Yeah.
What would be not helpful is if these authorities are held up and one could see a threat coming either on the ground, in the air, or whatever. I mean, as we always say here, anywhere with a fence needs to have multi-domain capability now, because it's not just a ground threat that's going to try to come into your area. It's going to be coming from the air or even from underneath the ground with other techniques. So it's way outside my expertise. This is really a policy, legal, and ethical and liability type issue, right? Because I mean, one of the concerns that we have to deal with all the time is here in the homeland. How do we ensure that the government agency recovers if some piece of equipment is used and the drone falls down or something like that, and how do all that gets mapped out, if it damages property or a person or something. So very, very complex, but I think it's a cost benefit analysis that has to be taken into account. And I truly hope for those of us that are old enough to have been involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, this harkens back to our IED threat and to the tragic events of 9/11, where there are these asymmetric threats that we know are out there, but we can't really figure out how we want to deal with them until it becomes a critical issue that we have to deal with very, very rapidly. And hopefully we can get ahead of it.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the topic is dual use, and we all know that we've seen lessons on the battlefield and threats on the battlefield that absolutely translate to the domestic context. And this idea of Afghanistan and Iraq. Rob, I think both you and I were involved in some of those operations, and we saw where authorities were delegated just too damn high. Let's just call it what it is. You obviously can't get into great detail here on an unclassified network, but at some point people realize, no, we got to kind of delegate this down, because the people that are there and that can actually do something about it need to have the authority, and we need to trust them, right? And then you heard these terms like, oh, well, trust but verify. Good Lord, that means we really don't trust you. But again, it's just like we need to be able to have our operators, with the authority to do these and to use this kind of technology that you had. We are about like 2 minutes out, Rob. I got a couple announcements I want to make before we do, but I want to give you this opportunity for your final 30-second elevator speech. And absolutely, please tell people how they can get in touch with you and learn more about the MACE system and the things you're doing at Northrop Grumman.
Yeah, absolutely. We are up on the web, on the Northrop Grumman website, and we are also available on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect directly with us here in Minneapolis. We are honored to work with this community. I have to say that many of our innovative technologies come from small businesses around the country and around the world, and we're very, very open to engaging and learning together as we solve this very complex threat that we are all facing. So we look forward to engaging and honored again to be with you on Dawn of Drones.
Well, thank you again, Rob, and thank you, Northrop, for sponsoring this Dual Use Technologies Month. I do want to mention that tomorrow on Clubhouse, we have next week's podcast guest from Mobilicom. This company is out of Israel, and they're an end-to-end provider of cybersecurity and smart solutions for drones, robotics, and autonomous platforms. So when you think about AI, you think about smart systems. Please join us. Check it out tomorrow on Clubhouse. Again, next week, their CEO is going to be on this podcast. The other thing I want to say, like in the 2 seconds we have left, is just announced this week, super excited about it, Rob. I hope you'll join us or some of your colleagues as well. Launching our first Law Tech Connect workshop in conjunction with AUVSI's Exponential in Orlando, Florida. This is going to be a one-day event focused on law and policy across all of these multi-domain platforms, air, land, and sea, on Monday, April 25th. Early bird rates apply, and man, you know what? The attorneys, they get 8 CLE credits, which is pretty amazing for a one-day event, all meals, and a free expo pass. So please join us. We'd love to have you. We have incredible folks, and I'm putting a lot of information out on that on social, so hope to see you there. But in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again, Rob. And for those pilots out there, and of course, our military members that are out in places like Kuwait and dangerous areas in the world, be safe, fly safe, and we are out here.